2. I am one of your hosts, George Terran, alongside the man, the myth, the Cardboard Box Kingdom Master, Travis Croft. How are you, sir?
I am fine and dandy. You know, I once upon a time had a job where I put my job description down as cardboard technician. So I'll take the cardboard master title. Thank you very much. A long earned and sought after title.
Absolutely.
Waddington will have to forgive me yet again, unfortunately. As I said last week, Electric Ham Sandwich Studios is on the road again in a couple of weeks. So the salubrious surrounds of this room, unfortunately, we butt saw them passing by. It's just somewhere new next after that. So I got to pack everything up and hit the road again. But you guys, no one watches the live streams anyway, so who gives a fuck? You're just listening.
I don't know. We might get one or two people who accidentally stumble upon it and just suddenly go, "Oh well, it was this or death." So death it is.
And I would support that decision personally. Yes,
it's fair. I mean, people who listen to our show, they've by this point they've probably spent about the equivalent of a soft jail sentence.
Well, and considering most of them are Russian bots, life can be short these days. So I'd say that's about 455 hours of this show alone, not including the G&T podcast,
the previous show. Yeah.
So that's enough for anybody for a lifetime, right?
Yeah, I think that's good. Now, we have got a packed show for you, as always. We have got our chain movie of the week, which is the classic, is it still a classic? Luc Besson directed Leon the Professional, starring Jean Reno, Gary Oldman, and Natalie Portman. Our connection from Do the Right Thing last week is Danny Aiello. We are going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, James Gunn's final MCU movie before he gets really into high gear of creating the new DC cinematic universe. And Travis picked our third and final movie of this week, going back nothing short of 40 years to Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And of course, we've got everyone's highlight, Binge, Browse, Burn.
So should we get cracking on... Get straight to it. The Leon the Professional, the chain movie of the week.
Yes. So this is the 1994 hour and 50 minutes. One of the movie. I think this is arguably the movie that really put Luc Besson on the on the Hollywood map more than just the French cinema, because he had previously done La Femme Nikita, which is a bit of a cult classic, and it did spawn a US TV show spin-off with Maggie Q, which was not terrible. And there was even a TV show version of it, I think in the mid-90s, with Peter Wilson, I think.
I remember that one being on TV late at night here.
Yeah. And for those who might not know Peter Wilson, if you've watched the much maligned League of Extraordinary Gentlemen Steve Norrington movie with Sean Connery, she played Mina Harker in that.
And we have seen that. We had to watch that for the show, I think.
Yes, we did. It was also kind of the movie that slam dunked Natalie Portman into the cerebral mind.
This is her film debut.
Yeah. And of course, the wonderfully over-the-top, coked up brain DEA agent that is Gary Oldman.
Now, there are a few different cuts of this film, I understand. There's a director's or a European version. There's the more standard cinematic version that came out in the United States, probably everywhere else in the West. Where and how, which version did you watch?
SBS.
SBS, me too.
Yes.
I just on the side, I don't know if you had the same experience. I had a pretty bad experience watching this via SBS On Demand. I feel like there were pieces of a film I might have been missing, but were jettisoned in favor of commercials. Or
yeah, I had that same. It reminded me of the lazy edits that you got on terrestrial TV when movies came out. It's like, oh, you know what? We'll keep that just playing, and oh, yep, 15 minutes is in. Let's just cut to an advert, and then suddenly it cuts back, and you've missed 15 minutes, like 2 minutes of the film. It's like, wait, what?
We get it kept jumping like 40 minutes into the film after the first commercial break was like 20 minutes into the film, and so it was a pretty bad experience. I watched a reasonable amount of SBS on demand because it's a good channel and their streaming service is okay apart from the commercials.
Yeah.
Something was not right with this.
Yeah, it was
for me.
almost like sort of like they weren't maybe they weren't able to get a certain. They didn't have rights to it. The sort of like the most universally known version of the movie or something like that. I don't know.
I think it's an SBS problem. I think it's just I think it didn't. I don't know. So I'm going to say put that caveat at the front of it, considering I might have missed some pieces of a film somewhere along the way.
I've not watched this before. Am I right?
I've never seen this film before, so not having watched it on DVD or video or at the cinema. You know, I wouldn't know if something important, even if it's a 5 seconds of a line here or there, might have been missed or something like that. It also impacted my enjoyment of the film because it was frustrating. Like literally, it would get frozen in the halfway through the commercial break. Look, if you can't get your fucking commercials right on your streaming service, then don't put them in, right? Like, yeah, and then it would jump. So, but here's the rub.
Yes.
This film has an 8.5 on IMDb. It is a number 35 in the top 250 movies on IMDb. As you said, a much beloved action classic of the 90s. I didn't like this film very much at all. I was thoroughly confused about exactly what it is that's supposedly so amazing about this film. And that is putting aside the creepy factor, which is is approaching Michael Jackson levels in this film. But quite aside from it, we'll talk about the creep factor a little bit later. But how did you feel? You obviously you're a fan of it from the way back.
Yes, but before we go into that, let's give the synopsis. So, after her father, stepmother, stepsister, and little brother are killed by her father's employers, 12-year-old Matilda, she's also the daughter of a drug dealer, takes refuge in the apartment of a professional hitman who, at her request, teaches her the methods of his job so she can take her revenge on the corrupt DEA agent who ruined her life by killing her beloved brother. That's pretty much a good synopsis.
Decent. This is not a particularly complex plot.
No, it is absolutely not. We are kind of introduced to Leon as almost especially because the conversation that we have with Danny Aiello, who's almost Leon's booking agent.
Handler?
Yeah. The way that he talks about him, sort of like bullets dance off you and things like that. It's Leon is the guy that you reach out to get the job done.
He's almost a John Wickian kind of character.
Kind of, yeah.
Without the kung fu.
I don't think we would have John Wick if we didn't have Leon.
There's a crossover the world didn't know they needed.
Ooh, that would be interesting. But yeah, so this is a movie that I studied at acting school. This is a movie that kind of has some notoriety of being tough, as like a hard-boiled kind of story, because it's like everyone comes from a broken place. Like Leon is, his depiction by Jean Reno is that he's not entirely fully functional.
Emotionally detached would be probably the best way to put it. But I mean, potentially going through to potentially autistic or to put it in a crude way, simple-minded.
Yeah, there's
almost childlike,
Arrested Development kind of element to it in some things, like the fact that he just drinks milk. And he's very, very regimented in his life, which are, some there's some things that you could read into that. It's never overtly said or anything like that because that is not actually important to the story, really.
In fact, I would argue it's actually essential to the survival of this story, but we'll come back to that.
But yes, this is a movie that was very popular in the sort of like 90s through to the early 2000s, especially getting a resurgence after Natalie Portman hooked up with the Star Wars franchise in 99. And everyone's kind of persistently loved Gary Oldman and his over-the-top everyone line delivery, and he's being very much 90s Gary Oldman in this movie. I still like it, but like I was afraid of when I chose it and I commented it last week about the relationship between Matilda and Leon, it is not aging well. It was never healthy, should we say, and it's just gotten more and more uncomfortable to watch. And I decided to do a little bit of research just about kind of arguments for and against it. And there's a lot of people that are saying, oh, this is very typical of French cinema in the early 90s, which some of the French cinema I've seen, yeah, there is some weight to that argument. But at the same time, that still doesn't necessarily make it appropriate.
There's an argument. I read an article last week. I can't remember exactly where, from an author who sort of was asking the question of like, how do you appreciate art made by monsters? I think I'm paraphrasing, and she was referencing David Bowie in the headline, and also talking about people, Roman Polanski, Woody Allen, Michael Jackson. The reason David Bowie gets lumped into those, and it's up to you whether you feel it's a fair comparison, is that apparently there was a famous story about a groupie who said she lost her virginity to him when she was 15 or 16. I think Kate Hudson's character in Almost Famous. Like professional groupie. Well, no, that's probably the wrong way to put it. But anyway, someone who was well known for it anyway. And she wasn't. From what I understand, it was in her book, and she wasn't writing it in a way of, oh, he's a horrible person who did this to me. It was almost in her mind celebrating it. But like, obviously, it doesn't really matter. She was not in a position to consent to that because she wasn't of age, and hence, assuming she's telling the truth, that's pretty questionable behavior from David Bowie. Now, as I said, up to you if you consider that worthy of a Michael Jackson or a Woody Allen, Roman Polanski kind of level of thing. But I guess that question is the argument, and I don't want to run it because I am obviously a huge David Bowie fan, but like the thing that keeps preparing to my head is it's the 70s, right? Things were a little bit different back then. Yeah. It doesn't make it okay, and I'm not endorsing the behavior, other than to say that it was a different atmosphere for that kind of thing back then. But you keep coming back, looping it back to my head is going, well, that doesn't make it okay. But, it does make you wear something you kind of got away with, or you sort of looked at it and go, no, it's harmless, 20, 25 years ago. And you look back at it now and you're like, no, that was definitely misguided on my behalf.
Yeah.
And everyone else for that matter.
Yeah. Hindsight is 20/20, and it is permanently changing because, it's sort of like the way that society evolves and changes. We suddenly do look back on things and go, oh.
So, I mean, that said, like it's French, it's okay argument for me doesn't really stack up.
Agreed.
And what does make this, and just we're talking about the creep factor, is that the actress who played the blonde bimbo, I think was the character name in the film. I think it's the prostitute who is, engaged by the person who Leon kills at the start of the film.
Yeah.
Blonde Babe, I'm sorry, her name is Blonde Babe, played by Maywin, I don't know how to pronounce that.
Yeah.
He was a former partner and lover of Luc Besson, who apparently met her when she was like 13 or something, when he was 38, you know. Here we go. So, according to actress Maïwenn Lebesco, part of the film is based on her romantic relationship with writer-director Luc Besson. Lebesco plays the interfering drug dealer's blonde babe in the opening scene and was engaged to the writer-director at the time the film was made. Lebesco had met Besson when she was 11 years old and fallen in love with him when she was 15. Besson was 32 years old at the time. I believe he actually had a child with her before she was 18. So keep all of this in mind when you see a film about a very questionable relationship between a young girl and an older man in this film. And I did not know this before we saw this film.
Neither did I.
Makes me look at Besson in a very different light. And if you go through a lot of his work, they have very similar themes. Yeah, the film Nikita being about, you know, a young girl, abused girl who goes on to become, you know, an assassin who, you know, seeking revenge. You could make an argument The Fifth Element has similar parts as well, through to the Lucy film he made with Scarlett Johansson. Luc Besson's a deeply questionable person now, I think.
Yeah, it's very disappointing to kind of hear that and say, oh. But there was going back to this uncomfortable relationship between Matilda and Leon. According to Jean Reno, he decided to play Leon as if he was a little mentally slow and emotionally repressed. He felt this would make audience relax and realize he wasn't someone who would take advantage of a vulnerable young girl. Reno claims that Leon, the possibility of a physical relationship is not even conceivable, and as such, during the scenes when such a relationship is discussed, Reno very much allowed Portman to be emotionally in control of the scenes. So I think even when this was being made, there was debate about where the line was going to be drawn and how it was going to be discussed. So it's a really interesting case to look at for many, many reasons. You would not make that relationship in a movie today.
You would not. And I mean, to take the opposite side of this argument, is art less for that? I mean, can I not tell this story? I mean, it's uncomfortable, but should art not make you uncomfortable? I don't know. I'm not just popping it out there. I had the vibe of when I saw Lolita. There were Lolita kind of vibes to parts of his film as well. And, you know, while the Western version of this kept the relationship between the Leon and Matilda, you know, pretty above board, apart from Matilda saying some stuff that made me very uncomfortable. Leon does not reciprocate anyway. I don't think he does anything that's particularly sexually inappropriate. I was going to say he didn't do anything inappropriate. He teaches her how to kill people. In some aspects, maybe that would be considered inappropriate. And maybe that's one of the interesting angles of the story, is the fact we walk away from this going, we feel that's really inappropriate, that is the intimate nature of a potential intimate nature of a relationship is inappropriate, which of course it absolutely is. But we kind of ignore the fact that he's teaching her how to kill people and go, yeah, it's fine, but we're really worried about this thing over here, when you should be going, aren't both equally inappropriate and horrible to be, imposing on a young child. But what I think is worse for me, and what really made it more uncomfortable than the story elements between these two characters, was the way Besson, or his cinematographer, shot Natalie Portman. Like, and what her wardrobe is. Now, that choker she wears all the way through the film is making her somewhat sexualized. Now, they were popular in the 90s, I'll pay that, but I don't know about they are used extensively in this film. And the way the camera lingers on her body at points in time made me very uncomfortable. Now, when you put that together with what we know about Luc Besson and his penchant for underage girls, I can't file this under his French. And that was so parts of the film were almost unspoken that were, I think, uglier to me even than the proposed relationship between these two characters and how that played out.
I think, to her credit, I suppose, as a film debut for Natalie Portman, she does an amazing performance for clearly what Luc Besson is aiming for. He is aiming to tell us, and she really delivers on that in all fronts. The close-ups of her face as she's like really emotionally trying to connect with Leon, and every scenario that she's in, she just absolutely goes for it, and it is a phenomenal performance. But that just only further highlights just how uncomfortable it really is.
If you can step back from the creep factor right now, I mean, because it's definitely there and you can't ignore it, and it's definitely going to influence your enjoyment of a film. If you've never seen it like me, if you're seeing it the first time in 20 years, like George might be, I kind of come back to my central thesis that this is not a very good film. It is not very well written. It is not very well acted. It is not very well made. I think it has serious pacing issues. It jumps around a lot. I thought it was super cliche. Is that a cat?
No. What? Sorry, Siri just decided to suddenly start talking to me for some reason.
Well, you got to get decent conversation somewhere.
We were talking about bots and she started listening.
They're always watching. Honestly, I don't know if this is a great film. Like I don't know. Maybe it was great in the 90s. It certainly hasn't aged well for me. I talk Gary Oldman, in famously Untouchable and the over top performances. Like I always think of him as his character from The Fifth Element. I really enjoyed him in that, and I think the over the top elements kind of worked better in that film than it did in this one. Like he was chewing the fucking scenery. Like he was. I mean, I haven't seen overacting like that in a long, long time. It was
the quiet moments.
It was very, very distractingly overacting in this film. And like, yes, the scene where everyone was kind of cool. I'm like, oh, that's what that reference is.
Yeah.
I've seen that parodied so many times. But I found it was really distractingly over the top. The film kind of reminded me of, at least for the first third, was something on the lines of Natural Born Killers, because it was so grimy and it made me feel dirty just watching it. These people, but I'm at a loss. What is so great about this film?
I remember really enjoying it, and I don't enjoy it as much as I did. It has not aged well overall, but I still think some of the core tenets are still strong with it. Like the action sequences, particularly the end sequence of it's almost a reverse of like The Raid, and that closeness and that close-up action breaking in somewhere. This is the opposite side of that, where someone's just defending, and he does it really well, and it's very simply shot. It's not trying to do anything particularly over the top. It feels like it's done on a budget, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I remember it fondly. Is I was watching this, studying this when I was trying to make movies like this, and it's like, this looks like it was made on a low budget, and you can make action look cool on a low budget. And there's like, looking back at it now, there's like moments where there's sort of like first person POV camera shots, and it's like it adds a little element of kind of in your face attitude to those action sequences. And the close-ups of the fucking mini missile grenade thing as it kind of shoots through the thing just before Leon goes, "Oh!" stupidly. Why does he scream like a monkey? It doesn't make any sense. But there's like an energy to it a lot. But there's also the flip side, and it's almost a tale of two. Because it starts off very somber and simple of, you see Leon living this very isolated, lonely life, and it's like, okay, is this going to be about him developing kind of attachment to the outer world beyond this world that he is currently the master of, in a way? And the archway that leads him to this greener pastures is this Matilda character. And that's kind of the story, but not really. And it ends up, you bring in Gary Oldman, and suddenly it's almost a parody and an over-the-top kind of absurdity. This is almost like a comic book movie before comic book movies were a thing.
Gary Oldman's in another film.
Yeah.
Did somebody tell him what this film was about and what the rest of the actors were doing? Was he wasn't doing the same thing?
Well, this was during a time when he was on a lot of drugs. So he may not have been aware of what movie he was in.
There's every chance here, and that would explain very nicely why he was so over the top. It's very Besson-ish. I mean, he's always had a way with action. But I think that works better in a film like, again, The Fifth Element, where it's fantastical. You're not supposed... I feel like I'm seeing is really... As you sort of said, it tries to look gritty and grounded. It had a $16 million budget. That's not a cheap film in 1994. You know, that, and this is his first Hollywood film, by the way. So, got your original point about this is what it made him famous. I think you're right. But you got this grounded, gritty characters and drama with his wacky, over the top character in terms of Oliver Stone, with this, ridiculous action, and putting it all together is a difficult task. John Wick's pulled it off to a degree, but.
And then the character is
getting
not as over the top as Gary Oldman's Stansfield.
In what John Wick? No, well, not really, but he's heavily stylized. I mean, but you and I talked a couple of months ago now, about how the really wacky, over the top, fight scenes in John Wick are getting a bit much for us. Everybody else is suspending disbelief, but a lot of us out here are going, "Come on, how many balconies can he be thrown off and just walk away?"
Why is it all the cars in France are bouncy?
Even John Wick can't really, as beloved as that series is, can't keep pulling it off. I think it was getting less and less, but this film just didn't get that balance right. It felt all over the shop. It felt messy. Yeah. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm seeing. Is it supposed to be a parody? Is it supposed to be over the top? And I just felt it kind of dragged in the end for me. I found I think the main problem with it for me is that it had expectations up here. When you have a film with an 8.5, top 40 of IMDb 250, one of the great action films of all time, apparently, if you listen to people talk, and you sit there and go, "Oh, okay, well, my expectations are significantly higher than they were for Piranha 3D or Monkey Bone, for that matter." Monkey Bone was okay because it wasn't awful. I mean, it was just kind of a mess. But I'm expecting awful for that film. With this one, I'm expecting nigh perfection for an 8.5, and I was just at a loss about what was so incredible. Again, ignoring the ick creepy factor, I just think it's a bit dull. And maybe it's just because maybe it's the Godfather effect. Everything this film did well has now been done to death. But Michelle made an interesting observation. But this is kind of trying to out Tarantino a little. And he was obviously the king of stylized violence in the 90s. And this is 2 years after Reservoir Dogs came out. A very different kind of film, but the highly stylized violence, I can see that argument. And what Tarantino does well, at least in his 90s films, was that wonderful dialogue between these characters. Which kept it feeling grounded and real and entertaining. And then you had the crazy, wacky, dancing to steal his wheel, cutting people's ear off part. Luc Besson is not Quentin Tarantino.
No, he is not. No. It's a shame when we go back to movies that we held so highly at some point and really see the faults and the flaws and things like that. But I still overall like this movie. I've got issues with the relationship of Matilda and Leon, as I've talked about, but I do quite like the stylistic look of it. I mean, on a cinematography level, take away the creep factor, it looks cool, like the angles and the close-ups with the, this like, oh yeah, the gun is right there in the screen and things like that. It looks cool, and particularly when you look at stills from it, they are sorts of things where you could just go, all right, I like that shot. I'm going to put that as a picture up on my wall. It's almost Zack Snyder-y in that regard, as like, yeah, he knows how to use the camera and use the screen to really highlight something great as a moment. Strung together as a story. It's a very thin story, and it's a shame because I think that if they remade Leon today without the creep factor and just almost put it as this great assassin versus a corrupt cop, kind of ultimately butting heads because of something, they could do that. But I feel like many movies have already basically done that. So I think this has inspired a lot of other movies since that have gone on to do bigger, better things.
I think you're right. I mean, as you said earlier, I don't think John Wick exists without this film. This is the film that made Fifth Element possible, which I think is still Luc Besson's best film. But I, as I said, maybe I had to see it in the 90s. It really felt dated and kind of dull. I mean, I just kind of expected so much more of this. And I, if you're listening at home or watching on the YouTubes or the Twitches, and you're sitting here going, what the fuck is he talking about? This is an incredible film. I'd love to hear some more from people about what you love about this film.
It recently with great thoughts. Yeah, I want to hear.
In fact, there was a interesting. I watched this on Sunday, and then later that night, I noticed a conversation in r/movies on Reddit about this very film. And
we are such trendsetters.
The breadth of opinion is interesting, but the conversation still says people going, "I still love this film. I still think it's a classic." And I just sort of found myself going, sorry, I missed that whole thing. I just don't understand what's so great about it. But I would love to hear from people who think it's great to explain to me what I got wrong and what I missed here.
Oh, now the keys are yours, sir.
I am going to go somewhere interesting. I had a lot of choices. It's a lot of X's, and I'm not taking an obvious one. I would like to give a shout out to one of the options I considered. Because it was such a close call this afternoon. I thought about following Don Creech, who plays Second Stansfield Man, to a film from 1996 called Flirting with Disaster, which was David O. Russell's second feature film.
Yeah.
And it sounds interesting. I've actually procured a copy because I might still watch it anyway. Ben Stiller and David O. Russell. And I thought, that'd be interesting. David O. Russell, where did he come from? But I've come down on the side of following Ellen Green, who plays Matilda's mother. So I'm going with the unobvious choices here. And she was in a film in 1988 directed by Oliver Stone called Talk Radio, which sounded very interesting to me.
Little Shop of Horrors.
No. New musicals, no. But Talk Radio, I did a little bit of research on it this afternoon, and some consider it potentially Oliver Stone's best film.
Oh.
Now, that's massively high praise from a director who is extremely highly respected. And I thought it would be in keeping with, there's lots of, I could have gone to The Fifth Element. I considered going to The Phantom Menace just to be a shit.
I would, if we ever somehow get on Phantom Menace, I am only following on the actor Jar Jar Binks. I do not care. That's it.
I could have followed Michael Bartolucco, who was in Raging Bull. He was also, and this, you don't know how close you came to getting Desperately Seeking Susan, because he's in that as well. But no, I have tried to go. This sounds like a really interesting film, directed by one of the great directors of the 20th century. and I haven't seen it. I'm guessing you haven't seen
Ooh,
it.
no, I haven't.
I should be able to procure a copy.
Cool.
If for whatever reason I am unable to procure a copy, we will go with Flirting with Disaster.
Okay.
But I think I have my hands on a copy of Talk Radio, so we will be talking about that. And you got a few exits here, starring Eric Bogosian, John C. McGinley, a bunch of stuff, and of course Alec Baldwin, Michael Wincott. You can't make that work.
Oh, I've got a few options already in my mind.
And I think we've done Oliver Stone. I think we used him once before, if I'm not mistaken. But we'd have to go back and check the books.
I think we used him for W. Oh no, that was Thanks. I think The Connection.
Well, we could look it up, and because that'll be another easy one for you if you want to use Oliver Stone. But I said I will procure a copy of Talk Radio for us next week if I can. Or worst case scenario, if the fit hits a shan, we will go and see the David O. Russell film. But this is what you have to put up with when you're talking about obscure shit that doesn't seem to have a lot of sources in this country. It's Vale blockbuster. It was good for something after all.
There you go. All right, shall we talk about the big movie release of the week?
Yes, because no one else, you would have heard nothing about this film. Little indie film dropped last week. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Now, I want to ask a question first up. You sent me a message after seeing it about the volume. Did you have volume issues in your theater?
Yeah, it was so damn loud. It was obnoxiously loud. It was foul. Me and Crystal were both just sitting there with our ears plugged, just looking at it, and we could still hear everything perfectly. It was
wow. Where did you see it?
We went to Village Cinemas in Platy Valley, and yeah, it was just obnoxiously loud. I felt really bad for Crystal because I looked over and she was just plugging her ears. It just looked like she was in pain. It was so loud.
That sucks. It just ruined your experience. Yeah. Did you talk to them afterwards? Or?
No. It was a late night movie, and we just wanted anyway.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But and it's a particularly tough one because so much music in this, and so much great music in this. But when it's just blaring out at you, it did cause an effect of I'm not enjoying this. I think I'll probably enjoy this more at home when I can.
I went to a battle of the bands many years ago, and they could have been the greatest bands in the history of the world, but they had everything turned up to 11, and like the venue literally sold out of earplugs. So it doesn't matter how good something is; if it's too loud, it hurts your ears, and that's just too much. Anyway, for those who are unfamiliar, it's the third Guardians of the Galaxy film, the latest in the MCU saga. Still reeling from the loss of Gamora, Peter Quill rallies his team to defend the universe and one of their own, a mission that could mean the end of the Guardians if not successful. We're back with the usual cast as always. The big addition to the cast this time is the guy who plays Golden Boy, whose name's not popular. Will Poulter. Yeah. Will Poulter plays Adam Warlock, who is a character I am not familiar with in the Marvel canon. But I'm told
loosely, and he was teased at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, but we did not see him because apparently he is extraordinarily powerful in the pantheon of Marvel heroes, and apparently he kind of rivals Thanos in a similar way to the way that Captain Marvel was kind of sidelined for a lot of Infinity War and Endgame because it's like, you can probably just kill him. That's why he...
And also, I think that was because nobody liked the film. So, so it was one of the less popular films. And so I think they just handing... The task of killing Thanos over to a character we just met was probably a bit cheap. So anyway, same as always, same gang. We film starts with the gang hanging out on their newly acquired planetoid, Nowhere, which we met in the ill-fated Christmas special. Less said about that, the better.
I think they went to Nowhere before as well in another one of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies.
Maybe they did.
Yeah.
It's been a while since the last one came out, right? Was it 2015, 16?
Yeah.
2017.
You know,
So it's 6 years now.
yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why this took so long is because James Gunn was famously fired from it because of some tweets. And then
there was that whole pandemic in the middle that probably slowed things.
That's
So
another
they
window. We don't talk about it anymore.
Quill is still dealing with the fact that Gamora in this film is not the Gamora we knew from pre-Endgame. This is a Gamora from a different timeline who has no memory of her relationship with Peter or her time with the Guardians. Peter is taken to drinking, to dealing with his grief for that. Everyone's a bit down, a bit depressed when Golden Boy, Adam Warlock, turns up out of fucking nowhere and starts wrecking their shit with a particular aim to reclaim, shall we say, hurting and reclaiming Rocket before being stabbed by Nebula, which is kind of cool. And Rocket is critically injured. They are unable to save him because they discover that his heart, I think, has a kill switch installed. Which will explode if they try and operate or whatever. So they need to find the thing to get the thing to do the other thing to get the thing they need to save the thing. Basically, a giant fetch quest. They need to track down the manufacturer of the kill switch to get the code to turn it off, and in doing so, they encounter the High Evolutionary. One of their better villains of late, I think.
I
personally
agree, and
played by Chukwudi Ibuji. I'm probably pronouncing it badly. You would probably recognize him. He was in Peacemaker.
Oh yes, he was.
He was the handler of of Peacemaker's handler in Peace. Apparently, he shot his audition for this on a set of Peacemaker, which is all very incestuous considering James Gunn came up with that as well. And shit happens from there as they go from one place to the next place to get the thing to do the thing to get the other thing to say the thing. What was your impressions of Guardians 3?
As has honestly been the crux of every single Guardians of the Galaxy, Rocket is the emotional core of this movie. And he is the kind of the run through of the whole thing, even though they desperately do their best to try and keep Peter Quill in the center of the frame. Every scene that Rocket has been in, he has generally stolen it. It's a beautiful look back into the history of Rocket, and the CGI works really well for young Rocket, for his encaptured associates, Teefs, Lila, and Floor. And their story is emotional and beautiful. And this is not a comfortable movie to watch if you love animals and hate animal cruelty.
I would go so far as to say this is the darkest. I think
there's
a Marvel
lot of
film to
kind
date.
of body horror to this as well.
That body horror, the goriest, potentially the scariest.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I didn't scared, but I think I think this has a similar rating to a PG-13 rating, which I think is what Ant-Man Quantumania had, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a significantly creepier, scarier film for young kids than that one was. So if you have young children and they're like, "Oh, I want to go see this," be exceedingly careful. Some of the monsters and creatures in this are really off-puttingly scary. I was sort of thinking, this is James Gunn pulling back on his original horror, sweet spot, which he was famous for before he became a superhero director. And as you sort of said, the animal cruelty is simulated. They're not real animals. But you wouldn't know that, especially as a younger child.
Yeah. And to partner with that, Chukwudi does a really good job of making the High Evolutionary horrible. He's just mentally twisted and cruel and manipulative and just vile in every sense of it. There's like even just the look of kind of like the skin being pulled back until the reveal later on, which I won't spoil for anyone. The way that he treats everyone around him, that as the story progresses, his kind of descent into mad Caesar kind of elementary sort of ideology. It's grotesque, and he does a really good job of just a classic villain that no, unlike Killmonger, where he has a really good damn point, but he's the bad guy. This is like, no, he's the bad guy, and you're allowed to absolutely hate him. He is not a redeemable bad guy.
He's not Thanos, where you go, hang on.
Yeah.
He's coming from. He's actually he's just pure bad, which is fine. They're not the kind of villain that Marvel's pulled off to.
And it's quite
effectively,
refreshing considering the popularity, shall we say, of trying to make relatable bad guys. It's like, yep, that is absolutely the point. Everyone is the hero of their own story. Very good, but every now and then, it's nice just to have someone that you hate. For example, perfect example of a bad guy that everyone loves to hate. Alan Rickman from Prince of Thieves. This is just horrible.
Call off Christmas.
Exactly.
I think that this film has some strong points.
Mm-hmm.
I read somewhere, and I really actually agree with this. There's an 89-minute masterpiece stuck inside a 150-minute film.
Yeah.
It is way too long.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I say about it all the time. With my reviews of things, I always say things are too long.
Yep.
But this is 2 hours and 30 minutes. Is way too long. It has Return of the King ending syndrome.
Yep.
And it ends about 5 times. I'm exaggerating here. It ends a lot. And it needed to get to the fucking point way faster. It's incredibly so many ideas. It's so bloated.
The heist sequence was entirely unnecessary. Like, I love Nathan Fillion. He is an entertaining actor, but they spend so much time around the whole scenario around his characters. Like, no, just cut it all out, please. You don't.
I would be very sad to have cut him out because he was one of the highlights for me. Because I too love Nathan Fillion.
He was enjoyable, but it's like it's not really necessary.
I think it's probably giant parts of this were not necessary.
Yeah.
You really need to pick a lane. I don't know what part Adam Warlock's going to play in the future. I mean, spoiler alert here. It's not a massive spoiler, but there was a hint in the final credits that we will see Star-Lord return.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we've seen the last of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
At least this lineup of the Guardians of the Galaxy, there are.
Yeah, the OG Guardians are done, I think.
Yeah.
James Gunn is done, obviously, with Marvel.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody else would be game to pick up, the OG crew. I don't think the OG crew would work with anybody else.
Batista has said that he's done. He's retired Drax as well. Zoe Saldana has said that she doesn't want to do Gamora anymore. So it's like, okay, that's kind of a big chunk of the crew,
which I'm fine with, really fine. Like 3 and out, and they're 3 pretty decent films. And I'm saying this here, like, with my criticism of being too long included, it's way too long. It's still the best thing that Marvel's done since Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yep.
Now that's not saying very much because it's been kind of a shit show since then. But it is still a pretty decent trilogy for the most part. What I think where it falls down is, okay, Adam Warlock's he comes in looking like a serious badass at the start of a film. He looks ridiculous, but you quickly take him fucking seriously because he wrecks their shit.
Yeah.
And then he basically does nothing for the rest of the film but be the butt of jokes.
Yeah.
I'm like, hang on, what is he supposed to be?
Yeah.
Is he? I mean, it's insinuated, at the end what his role might be in the future, but you're like, they really didn't kind of take full advantage of this new character, who I sort of taken to be, again, like a very powerful, badass new character, and they just kind of pissed it against the wall because he had so many other ideas.
Yeah.
You mentioned the music before.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Michelle went over about halfway through the film to me and said they spent the entire budget on the soundtrack. I'm like, fuck yeah, there's so much music in this. And like, all of it's good. I love James Gunn's taste in music.
Yeah.
But it's actually quite intrusive at points in the film.
Absolutely.
And you're like, do we really need another pop song here or another famous song? Like, I don't, other than it being like a cool sequence of slowly walking across the screen, I'm like, yes, it looks cool and it sounds cool and I love this song, but like, we've had this happen a few times now already, and it's just getting a bit distracting.
Yeah. As someone who made a short film where I had literally music in every scene, it was either source or over the top as soundtrack. Oh boy, that was 15 minutes, and that was too much. And I looked at this and it's like, they haven't. Has every scene had music over it? I think it has. This is a great soundtrack, but do the movie. Get on.
In the earlier films, I think the music served the film.
Yeah.
If you think of like him playing his Walkman, was kind of a big part of Quill staying in touch with his humanity and his childhood and where he came from in the first film in particular. Then you have the cassette tapes and stuff like that. And now he's moved on to a Zune, which I do understand is a joke. Yeah. You know, if any way it could have been funny, it could have been if it was an iRiver. But you know, it's just like it's there because that's what we do in Guardians films.
Yeah.
It's not there to serve the story in the same way the songs were once upon a
time. Part
of
the formula.
The other part of the film I really didn't appreciate was, and you mentioned it was an emotional film, is if there was an emotional manipulation technique that James Gunn didn't use in this film, I can't think of it. Because I felt like every 5 minutes I was being manipulated. Oh, look at that! Isn't that fucking sad? Look at that! That's pretty fucking shit. They're torturing animals now. Are you feeling something inside yet? You dead motherfucker! Feel something. That's kind of what I felt bombarded by this. And I'm like, no, this is actually having the opposite effect on me. I am feeling very manipulated now by this film, and that I kind of shut down to what's going on in this film. It felt like a video game. Like, I don't know, you play a video, you've played enough games to know there's like, oh, you've got to escort this person, they might die, you escort them back to the other place, and you're like, well, I've got this other side quest to do first. They're not dying before I pick them up and start carrying them back to base, because the game needs them to be alive in order for me to pick them up and carry them back to the base. So there's no chance of them dying before I start that quest, if that makes sense. There are no stakes in this film. No one's dying. So Rocket's certainly not fucking dying. I'm certain that Rocket's not dying. They do not have the balls to kill off Rocket. So at no point was I actually emotionally invested in, oh, he might die, and I got to save Rocket. Like, he's going to survive because he needs to survive, because the film needs him to survive. And it felt like a video gamey to me, in the sense that I had no point ever worried about any of these characters, because Marvel has built this world where there are no stakes. They're not going to die. And even if they do, we can bring them back later.
Yeah, absolutely. The characters in the MCU that have died. Where you've got Black Widow. You've got one version of Gamora, but she's back. So that doesn't...
Loki a few times,
but he's back. Very much so. You've got...
half the Avengers.
But then they came back. It's okay.
Yes.
Permanent deaths. You've got...
Killmonger?
Well, I mean, he's still kind of... He's still in there, sort of. He's in the What If series. So it's like, okay, death doesn't really mean much.
Yondu, but even he made a cameo in this film.
Yep.
Spoiler.
Yep. They don't.
But he wasn't important.
Want you to forget anyone. It's like, okay, how they're shooting themselves in the foot, because they are very much at a point where, like, Chris Evans is done as Captain America. They've literally passed that mantle on to Anthony Mackie. Tony Stark, he's dead, and Robert Downey Jr. isn't coming back at anytime soon to do that. I feel like they're probably going to not do anything with Thor for a while because there's a movie with franchise fatigue and just poor results from the most recent one, frankly. All of the original ones, they haven't really kind of fully invested in the next people because they keep on reminding us about the people that were before. It's like, yeah, you did a really good job with them. Why are you doing a bad job with these guys?
There was a point in time in this film where a particular character, we looked at they're in trouble. And I was like, going, ooh, was I wrong here? Are they actually going to do it? Are they going to kill off somebody in the core crew who maybe doesn't want to come back? And then they didn't. And because you're like, yeah, of course they didn't. I'm like, man, what a pair of balls on James Gunn killing that character off, killing off one of his main crew. Like, stakes, man. Like, maybe we might actually be learning here, Marvel, and actually have something on the line here in one of these. No, they didn't.
And the fact that they basically nullified any possibility of death in this movie by having the med packs that are like genuine miracles of science. They can snap broken bones back together in like that, like a snap of the fingers. And they seem to be able to cure anything for anything. And it's like, okay, so you've got a ready supply of this. And there's so many bits where they force you to feel something. Like what happens with Peter towards the end. It's like, wait a minute. There was a genuinely emotional moment in Guardians of the Galaxy 2 where Yondu puts the spacewalky doohickey over Peter. Why doesn't Peter still have that? He had a helmet that could disappear into his thing. And there was something that I saw briefly about why Peter Quill doesn't have the helmet because it wouldn't have made the fight sequences in the corridors as good. It's like, his helmet disappeared into his collar. It's a push of a button. You're doing this purposely.
It's also, do we remember the rocket boots from the first film? They would have been handy in this film as well. So look, those are the things that annoyed me about this, and all of those things added to that runtime, which needed to be cut half an hour out of this. You mentioned one of the cool parts of the corridor fight scene was one of the better ones in the Marvel universe of late. It kind of reminded me of Serenity, made by He Who Shall Not. Remember the famous scene in Serenity? Those of you who have seen Serenity, where Summer Glau says, "My turn." You know the one, you know the scene, and just goes into that corridor of was it Reavers? I think it was in that film. I can't remember.
No, Reavers. Reavers.
Reavers. And just fucking in one of the more kick-ass fight scenes you will ever see, made by a horrible human being. Absolutely just owns this room full of deadly killers, and that kind of momentarily reminded me a little bit of Serenity, which isn't necessarily a good thing these days, but not necessarily a bad thing either. I liked a fair bit of the humor. I've heard some people complain it's too quippy, too many gags, and I'm like, it's Marvel, it's Guardians. They've always been quippy and gaggy.
And I think the time for the quips and things like that, particularly the kind of snarky nature between Mantis, Drax, and Nebula, I think it worked and informed on their relationship that they have been together for a while now, and they are kind of run ragged at this point, emotionally and physically, and they're snapping at each other like a family would in an American sitcom.
I like the evolution of Nebula to where she is now. It's actually been done quite subtly and skillfully. And I don't think maybe she gets the credit that Karen Gillan doesn't necessarily get the credit that she is due. Well done there. I like Cosmos, the relationship between Cosmos and I can't remember Shogun's character. I thought they were entertaining the two. I won't spoil it, but you know the one, Kraglin. And I know some people get pissy because obviously he used to direct his brother. But I think he works for me as a character. So I like
Yeah.
that quite a bit.
I also, to call out some performances, Dave Bautista as Drax is still great. His kind of the subtle little elements of evolution to his character, which must be really damn hard for a character that comes from a place where everything is literal. It's hard to bring evolution into that because he's supposed to take everything literally. And he just does well. And the line of I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Mantis saying that he was not supposed to be the destroyer, but the father. So like that did nicely kind of pull all of his character arc over the last 3 movies together, and was kind of true to the way that his character needed to be in this movie, shall we say. And it was deftly done. Dave Bautista continues to actually deliver good, strong performances.
I actually found that line incredibly cheesy.
You're a cold, heartless bastard.
Well, I am a cold, heartless bastard, but by that point in time, this is what about the danger I think of a film just going so hard on the emotional heartstrings and being so manipulative throughout its runtime. When you get to the actual part you want people to feel something about, the big hug at the end, and the dancing between Rocket and Groot.
But
God,
please don't. A thing of the Guardians of the Galaxy.
A little bit, but that was a joke. It was a joke in the first one with Quill dancing off against the universe,
and then there's like in number 2, then they have him and Gamora have a little bit of a dance, and it's always been there. That was over the top. That was borderline. Wait a minute, is this generation's Ewok celebration after the end of the war?
I know I did find myself going, yes, I've used dance before and music, and I know James Gunn loves dance. I think of as the opening sequence to Peacemaker again. Like that dance is actually really fucking great. But it just didn't work here for me. It was way too cheesy. Then the after credits scene sucked. But the last good thing I'll say about this though is for a film in the MCU that basically ignores the rest of the MCU.
That's exactly what I was just about to say. The fact that this is a standalone movie, essentially. It's like, oh my goodness, you've remembered how to make those.
And like, there's no reference to the multiverse or any of the other bullshit, which can only be a good thing because they have been stinking it up of late after Endgame. We all knew it was going to go downhill after Endgame. You can't live up to that standard all the time, but they have, by any objective standard, they have not been good. In phase 5 or 6 so far. And to have a film starring beloved characters, it doesn't have to have references and Easter eggs referencing the rest of what's going on in the films. It was really nice.
Absolutely agree.
I still think James Gunn is a great director. Maybe I need time. Maybe it is time for me to start putting on the fanboy hat for James Gunn.
To do that, I will remind you of the Christmas special.
Look, I hated the Christmas special, but everyone gets one.
Exactly. It's okay.
So, it could have been very funny, but
this wasn't.
They just fucked it up. So I still think he's one of the most interesting and talented and entertaining directors that the MCU has tolerated. So the other people who directed trilogies have been, of course, John Watts who did the Spider-Man
John Watts
ones.
has done the Spider-Man ones. There's not been a single director to complete a trilogy though in the MCU. But
didn't he do all 3 of his? Oh, Peyton Reed did the.
Yes, he did all 3 of those ones, coming in to take over from Edgar Wright, but that was early on. So yeah, Peyton Reed has done the 3 Ant-Man movies.
And did not Watts do all 3 of his Spider-Man films?
Yes, that is true. Yes, that's true.
But I think the thing about Peyton Reed is it's always seemed a damn shame to me that Edgar Wright didn't get to do his films. So Edgar Wright said, I wanted to make an Ant-Man film, but Marvel didn't want to make an Edgar Wright film.
I think, imagine if Ant-Man had come out after the first Guardians of the Galaxy. And the success that James Gunn had, being allowed to be quite James Gunny in the MCU, and they just gone, okay, we'll allow Edgar Wright to do the similar thing in Ant-Man. It would be an interesting how that would have shifted the tone of the MCU.
I guess what I'm trying to get to here for me is that I look, and maybe incorrectly, and maybe I'm being harsh, but both John Watts and Peyton Reed are not exactly auteurs. You know, these are the kind of guys I think Marvel enjoy working with, because I don't know a whole lot about them, to be honest. They don't have a lot of style or substance about what they. It's not like I go, oh, that is a John Watts
follow
film.
a recipe.
Exactly. They come in, they director for hire, malleable. Whereas James Gunn has a definite style. You can watch a film and go, this is a James Gunn film. And I will be now, what I'm trying to get to is that now that he's leaving Marvel, it's quite a sad thing for Marvel, because even Sam Raimi doesn't get to do what he wants to do, you know? He does what he's told. Whereas maybe James and Taika Waititi were the last two to be able to do whatever the fuck they wanted. And that didn't really work out so well for Taika last time. Now, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what he can do with Superman and the rest of the DC universe. And I think the interesting thing for me about DCU now is they have been so bad. They have been laid so low over the last few years that they have to take risks now to get back. And that is going to lead potentially to some disastrous shit, but it could also lead to something brilliant. Marvel takes
exactly.
No risks.
And DC are kind of in the same position that Nintendo were when they released the Wii U. They had an idea, and in a few kind of very narrow margins, those are like, oh, that is a good idea. That's an interesting idea. Having a tablet that you can play on the TV or away from, that's kind of cool. But it just didn't work. And then so Nintendo had to scramble, and they came up with the Switch, which is an unequivocal success. Because they had to think on their feet and get creative. And that's where DC are at right now. So we could very well see some interesting new stuff coming through, and I'm excited for it. But James Gunn did Christmas Special and this. And for both of those, I think it feels like he was kind of given carte blanche to do what he wanted. Christmas Special was bad. Absolutely 100% bad. This has so much James Gunn in it. He needs to make sure that he reins it in. Otherwise...
That call. He did get a little self-indulgent.
Otherwise, it's going to be messy, and it's just too much James Gunn, and there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Rein it in, tell the story, keep your personality.
I think that's a fairly consistent best thing they've done for a while, but still self-indulgent and a long way from perfect. But it sounds like you enjoyed it despite the
overall. Yeah, I think it was fine. It was like you say, it was one of the much better MCU movies of the last 10 years, quite comfortably. The characters still retain the charm and delight that they had from when they first made their appearance. The bad guy is delightfully horrible that you enjoy hating and seeing his comeuppance. It is too long. It is playing too much on your emotional heartstrings very overtly, but I can kind of forgive that overall. It was, it did what it needed to do. James Gunn delivered and got it across the line, and he just told a story. He told the Guardians of the Galaxy story rather than sort of like, next time in the MCU, and it'll suddenly flash to, I don't know, like Spider Pig just walking around, something like that.
Should we move on? We're getting long. We've got one more film. We're going to have a quick recap of our next very relevant new film in the in the zeitgeist of everyone's talking about. We're out of ideas about what to have as our third film this week. So I mentioned I had rewatched this recently because it turns out Michelle had never seen it before, and that is more than 40 years. This is a 46-year-old film, Close Encounters of a Third Kind, directed by up-and-comer nobody who never really happened, never really went anywhere, Steven Spielberg, something like that.
Spielberg.
The Mexican non-union equivalent. Roy Neary, an Indiana electric lineman, finds his quiet and ordinary life turned upside down after a close encounter with a UFO, spurring him to an obsessed cross-country quest for answers as a momentous event approaches.
Yep.
Starring famously Richard Dreyfuss. Francois, I did not know this before I saw this again recently. Francois Truffaut, the famous French film director. Bob Balaban, a very, very, very young Bob Balaban. I don't know. Lance Henriksen was in it, but there's not a lot of other big names in there you'll remember.
Yeah.
It is 46 years ago. So
I am genuinely surprised. I could have sworn that this movie was 2 hours 45 minutes. Not.
Maybe there was like a director's cut or something, but it is long. It's 2 hours 18 minutes.
It certainly feels like nearly 3 hours long. Because this is a methodical, slow boiling to not really boiling point movie. Like what did I mean? I still kind of like it. It's got a lot of classic things like the do 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 do. That's iconic. Roy making the mountain out of mashed potato at the.
I had to. That's been Godfather to death. It's been parodied so many times. It's like Michelle was like, "Where do I know this from?" I had to pull up the Simpsons episode where Homer makes the big top out of mashed potato, and you know, it's hard. It's difficult to take those scenes seriously sometimes, and they've been so successfully parodied. But you're right.
And there's so many wonderful things that have kind of aged poorly, partly Godfather syndrome-esque, but also just like when the kid opens the door and there's all the lights and things like that through it, that's been parodied and homaged so much, and the use of stark lighting. I feel like this was the first time. This was probably an incredibly informative movie to J.J. Abrams, considering how much light is prevalent in this damn movie. Oh, crap.
Well, we know JJ's. I think he's a massive Spielberg fanboy. What was that film? Was it 8mm? Was that 8mm? Was that the one he did where he was basically a love letter to Spielberg? And you know, like if you're going to rip somebody off,
why not?
No. Make it good. I think you're being a little harsh. I kind of still enjoyed it. It is a bit on the slow side. It's interesting to see elements of stuff that came later, like the start of a film in the desert where they find all the ships. That had sort of Indiana Jones vibes. 4 years ahead of time, you can sort of start to see that Saturday afternoon matinee adventure story kind of influence starting to creep through there. The elements that later became E.T., the aliens, as opposed to, which was probably quite revolutionary. I'm not an expert in UFO films from the 70s, but
E.T., that I think that came out the same year as Alien, or something like that, or one of the sort of like horror alien movies. And it was
Alien came out in 1979. E.T. came out in 1982.
Okay, yeah. So people were just used to aliens bad, largely because aliens quite often.
I think War of the Worlds, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
it's probably what you're expecting of alien invasion films. But aliens being somewhat benevolent was probably quite an original idea at the time.
Yeah,
I would like to mention the special effects. I think they hold up incredibly well.
Looks great. Still, to this day, it looks great.
Maybe the rubber-headed aliens look a little bit silly, but you know, you probably, in hindsight, maybe shouldn't have shown that, but it probably looked great in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, I liked all the references to different things. You know, the Bermuda Triangle pilots and stuff coming out. you know, them finding their planes, you know, intact and stuff like that, was pretty cool. It was written with well written film. It was written with love, with someone who had, you know, a great deal of time and energy for this kind of thing. It almost felt X-File-y. Again, the X-Files is probably something that may owe an homage to some of its, existence to this film as well.
Yeah.
That kind of conspiracy theory-ish kind of thing. The idea of the government keeping things from us. In this case, something quite benevolent. But that's hardly an original storyline either.
But I think there's a lot here that it doesn't. I don't know if it stands the test of time purely because of how mined it has been. And I think it's like to use that allegory, it's a mountain that people have just dived into so much that if you take one more pebble from that mountain, the whole thing's just going to go and just disappear.
I think it depends on how exposed to that you have been. In the sense of how much you've seen in terms of film in the last 40 years, how much TV you've seen, that kind of thing. I think I might be talking to school, but having Michelle with me who'd never seen it before, I think she quite enjoyed it. While thinking it was a bit long, a bit, as you said, methodical. Could have done with some 15, 20 minutes hacked out of it as usual. So it was still happening. Even 46 years ago, it was happening. But it didn't need that. But I still think it had moments of wonder and pure excitement of discovery, and that scene at the end, the famous scene with the keyboards and the lights and the mothership, it just boggles the mind. I still think it evokes that feeling of wonder to some degree, at least. For maybe you and I are just too cynical for this world, But
I have a fond memory of this because I remember it was the movie that I went the first time I ever went to drive-through cinema, and watching this on that screen, it was kind of cool because of the lighting of it and all the cars just sitting there. I felt like I was there in that end sequence when the mothership's down, because there's so much light and all of the metal reflecting off the cars and things like that. It added this sense of almost 3D to it, which was kind of cool. And Richard Dreyfuss delivers a great performance in this as well. Really
he's fantastic. It's a strange story in a lot of ways. The way his family rejects him and basically discards him because he's come up with these wacky ideas about UFOs, and we don't want to know you anymore. You're too fucking weird for us. How if only that were true for the QAnon types. And he how quickly he takes up with is it Gillian, who is one of the more neglectful parents I've ever seen in the film. He's let a kid run wild across the freaking field and get abducted by aliens. No worries, whatever.
They'll look up the room. It's fine.
It was a strange one how that sort of that the family just simply rejected him and moved on with somebody else so quickly. I guess the film needed it to happen. We are making it a quick and dirty one for an all-time classic here, but I was glad to go back and experience it again.
It's interesting watching this because I did the last time I watched this, I did a double bill, and I did this, and then I went into Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. And it's weird, the polar opposites of them, but having so many, Steven Spielberg rips so many of his own ideas out of Close Encounters for War of the Worlds, and in some ways purposefully twists them. In other ways, he's just being lazy because he's getting old now. And War of the Worlds is not as good as Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
No, it's not. It's
easily said.
Has moments, but no.
Yeah. But it was interesting just watching those two together and going, oh yeah, huh. And then just thinking about it again now and just going, yeah. So the scary aliens from outer space was what we what came before this and E.T. And it was also an allegory for sort of like communism and things like that coming in, the Cold War.
Okay, I've just been advised, Michelle,
Yes.
I am misremembering, and Michelle hated it if it was boring and long and thought the main character was allowed to join the circus. So I misremembered. I apologize for my for misspeaking. That she liked this film, and apparently it was just me who liked it.
Thank you for keeping him honest, Michelle.
Yes. Sometimes I misremember, but anyway, it is a long film for the
Yeah,
70s, and
yeah,
it takes its time to get there.
absolutely.
I still think if you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it, if nothing else, from a film history perspective.
Yeah, I would put it more in the film history rather than cinema entertainment, shall we say. But let's go on to the final portion of our show, shall we?
Mm-hmm. Binge, browse, burn.
I want to start off, if that's okay.
Of course.
I've got a browse soft binge for Apple TV. It came out, I think, today or yesterday. Silo.
My first choice as well. I have watched the first 2 episodes.
Ah, okay. Look at that.
We did not.
We did not
coordinate.
organize this. Everyone who's watched the show knows that we don't organize shit.
Yeah.
This is the new show on Apple TV, starring Rebecca Ferguson. It's got a whole bunch of names that you'll go, oh yeah, I know them from somewhere. Rebecca Ferguson, who's most currently in the Dune series with Denis Villeneuve, and she has been in at least one. I think she's in 2 of the Mission Impossible movies. There's Ian Glenn, TV's older dad, who's still kind of like husky and somewhat sexy. He was in Game of Thrones. Will Patton. You got Tim Robbins making an appearance in the first episode.
Rashida Wallace.
Yep.
Common. David Oyelowo, who is maybe not a name you'll know, but he's been in stuff.
Yep. Rashida Jones, you might know from some places.
The castle, the office, wasn't it? I think in Parks and Rec.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Parks and Rec, and she was in the Social Network as well, apparently. But this is the synopsis for it. Everyone is men and women live in a giant silo underground with several regulations which they believe are in place to protect them from the toxic and ruined world on the surface where all the zombies live.
That's a piece of this exposition that is not in the first 2 episodes.
No. So that's a. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, for the spoiler. Apparently, because
well, I mean, I don't know where it's coming from. Like, is that something Apple's put on there?
I don't know.
But this is based on a series of books, so I believe. So maybe that's where someone's got it from. I think the books are written by the creator. Was it Graham Yost?
Hugh Howey.
Sorry, my bad.
Oh, sorry,
yeah,
Hugh Howey, based on the book.
So maybe it's in the books.
Maybe, yeah.
First thing I know about this is seriously heavy, overwhelming Fallout vibes.
Yeah, this because I saw I didn't know anything about this TV show until I saw a trailer drop maybe 3 weeks ago on Apple TV, and I thought, okay, this looks like a proto Fallout. I'm curious, and after watching the first episode, it's like, okay, they've done quite well at building a bit of mystery here and sowing a couple of seeds for what could come. There's conspiracy theories going on. This is kind of interesting. I wonder if this is the sort of thing they're going to do with the Fallout TV show. If they do,
well, I've said before, I'm very curious to see what they do with this.
Yeah.
I like you. I enjoyed the first episode enough to go back to the second episode.
Yeah.
But it's a very strangely structured start to a TV show.
Yeah.
In the sense that in our first episode, we meet 2 characters. We meet Rashida Jones and her husband, the sheriff, who is played by, I forget his name again, because David Oyelowo, Sheriff Holston.
Yep.
And Look, I think we can reveal what happens in the first episode, right? I mean, you got to go heavy on the spoilers here, but it's the first hour of
Side.
But Rashida Jones detects a conspiracy going on. No one's allowed to possess information or relics from before a point in the past called the Rebellion.
Yeah.
After discovering some information that looks like it may be from around that time, she begins to question whether or not they're being told the whole truth about why they are in this silo and about what's really outside. So she demands to go outside. And apparently in this world, if you ask to go outside, you go outside. The end of the story.
It is the cardinal rule. You don't ask to go outside, but if you do, you go outside.
And the idea is once you're outside, your job is to clean the sensors, the little video camera. That means that people can see outside. And she dies, at least appears to die, shortly after cleaning with the video camera and sensors. At the end of the episode, Sheriff Holston also demands to go outside. So, spoiler alert, by the end of episode 1, 2 of our main characters are either dead or about to die.
And
these are the 2 characters we've just spent the entire episode getting to know and who have introduced us to this world, only to meet the actual protagonist of the show in the last shot of the episode. He does not, Juliet Nichols, played by Rebecca Ferguson, does not have a line in the entire first episode.
No.
And then we spent probably half of a second episode before she says anything of note, which is very interesting. And I'm not sure a particularly wise way of going about it, of introducing your protagonist. Basically, we start to get to know her halfway through the second episode. And when you've introduced 2 characters who've already, and they were good characters, I thought.
I think
they are basically gone by the end of the second episode. You're probably not going to see them again. And I'm like, that really detracted from it for me.
Having not watched the second episode yet, I can't comment on that one, but I do feel like it's probably a tool to get rid of a lot of the exposition and world building out of the way. So
and they do a lot of that in the first episode.
Yeah, there is a lot. We see elements of Tim Robbins' shady guy in a suit sort of thing, of just like, yes, you posted this, we've taken it down, that's not good. And so like words, and you see a couple of little sequences where, what do they call them, the protectorate or something?
Judicial.
The judicial, thank you, that come in to do raids for relics from the before times that are not allowed. And there's a lot of world building around this like mythos, and they generally do quite a good job of it not being so overly heavy, because they focus so much on just these 2 individual characters and their relationship, and how one is more open to taking on these potential conspiracy theories. This is one who is the sheriff and has to kind of abide by the rules. And there's a line that he says where, I took an oath. What an oath is worth nothing if you can hold it for one, not for another. And that was a good line. And the scene where he kind of reads the final verses to his wife, who's just about to be taken out the airlock, he delivers that line really well, and it informs you of what kind of a world you're probably living in. And I think if you were going to add in the main character as well, so like, ooh, that's a lot. So
I don't understand why you just wouldn't start with a main character. Like, start with 2 fringe characters who you're never going to see again. And I spend an hour of my time getting to know this world through the eyes of 2 characters who don't matter. Like, you've got usually these things are a limited series. I'm guessing what, like 8, 9, 10 episodes or something like that.
This is apparently
how many? Sorry,
10 episodes for this one.
So you've just wasted 1/10 of your time on the screen on building characters I don't get to see again.
Yeah,
or barely ever get to see again, who are now just mentioned by other characters.
Yeah,
Including one of probably the biggest name in the show. Everyone's going to know Rashida Jones. I did not recognize Rachel Ferguson. Rebecca Ferguson. Now I vaguely remember from June, but I've tried to black that film out of my memory. Um,
You bastard.
look, I'm gonna go.
Got June 2
I
coming
have.
up.
Yeah, great. I'll bring the no-dos. I liked it enough. I am curious enough
Mhm.
to go back for a third episode whenever that comes. I assume next week.
Yes.
It does take for me some missteps in the second episode where I start to get. I've said about this before, but is this going to be another Lost or another Wayward Pines? Remember Wayward Pines?
Yeah.
Like where you're like first half,
two-thirds.
like the 2/3 of the first, you're like, this is fucking incredible.
Yep.
And then you get to the end and you're like, really?
Well,
That's what this was?
That's the thing. So many of these shows have great premise, and they set up, and then you kind of build it and build it and build it, and then it gets to the turn, and suddenly you go, oh, it's like having an online dating chat with someone who's used nothing but filters, and then you meet them for the first time, and they're a pizza in a dress, and like, oh.
Or they look like me, I mean, that's,
An air and suave.
Yes, of course. But depends if this is not what you're expecting. If you get rid of the filters, I there are points in this that kind of remind me a little bit of Wayward Pines. Where they've been living in this silo for hundreds of years, and they still have fresh food all the time, and everything. They've got computers that still work, but they have some form of the internet, but they don't have telephones. It just doesn't make sense to me. Like, how do computers work for hundreds of years? They don't. They wear out. Do you have shit? How many spare parts do you have? And when you stopped and thought about how Wayward Pines' supposed premise was supposed to work, it didn't make any sense either.
No.
And I wonder if this will make sense in the end. But I am curious enough to, and I like the aesthetic, that I will watch another episode or two and see if they start to really get somewhere interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen it. The other one it kind of is giving me vibes of is Logan's Run.
The movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that.
Do you remember?
That would be one that I think would be quite a good limited series as well.
There's been for years they were talking about remaking that. Michael Bay was going to do a remake,
There was also another director that has fallen out of grace, Bryan Singer. That was one of his passion projects.
And I think it's still kicking around. Probably gone to Jordan Peele now because he gets all the stuff that everybody else was gonna do. But if it's it's an interesting story, and the idea of it, like what's outside, isn't what we're always told. Is kind of seems to be the kind of the idea behind this show, and of course that was famously what Logan's Run was about.
Apparently, currently, Logan's Run, it's in development, written by Ryan J. Condal and 3 other writers.
Simon Kinberg, he, of course, the man who directed the last 2 X-Men films, Apocalypse.
Perfect example of failing upwards.
The guy's a decent writer and producer. Apparently, everybody likes working with him, but he is not a good director.
No, he is.
One other one I'd like to quickly talk about from my perspective, and I'm going to put this in the soft binge category.
Yeah.
And that is Succession. I think I talked about watching the first episode, and now we are at episode 7 of the last season, the famous last season. I don't know how many. I think I could spoil a little bit because there's a fairly big thing happened in episode 2 or 3 this season.
Okay.
And if you are not up to date with this season of Succession, if you're not watching it and you've somehow managed to avoid spoilers for the last month, good on you, but I'm going to spoil it for you now. Logan Roy, played by Brian Cox, dies very early on this season. And of course, he's kind of the center of this universe in the sense he's the Rupert Murdoch character. So episode 3, he passes away. And it's very low key. It's just, it kind of happens off screen mostly. And that episode, I'm in a funny place with Succession in the sense that I haven't watched all the rest of it. I actually couldn't be bothered watching 3 seasons before trying to get into this season. So I just watched a couple of catch-up videos on YouTube to tell me what had happened and who everybody was. And so I don't have a super abiding attachment to these characters that everybody else does.
Okay.
But I could tell straight away that Logan was the most interesting character in the show. And now he has been removed from the picture. There's this incredible power vacuum going on between people who are left, including his children, including he was in the process of selling his company to a Norwegian tech entrepreneur played by Bill Skarsgård, who is outstanding in this. He is on fucking fire right now, Bill Skarsgård. And I guess more normally the old guard, the old executives of the company. And I'm going to cop shit for this, but I think it's been kind of treading water a little bit since then. If you look at the ratings are as consistently high. Interestingly, the episode where he dies, it has a 9.9 on IMDb.
Wow.
The others are high 8s, low 9s. And maybe it's just in a situation where I'm like, nah, I'm really not fussed about who wins this fight because I don't have, hundreds of hours of, there's hours of 3 seasons of TV. I just watched a half-hour catch-up. But my goodness, it's well written. And the acting is phenomenal. They're all doing the best work of their careers. Sarah Snook, Rory Culkin, and Nicholas Brown is in there as cousin Craig. But who am I looking for here? Alan Ruck does some interest. Jeremy Strong is the one I'm looking for here. So Jeremy Strong, Sarah Snook, and Kieran Culkin. Sorry, not Rory. Ron Culkin. And they are all doing the best work of their careers as the 3 kids. Brian Cox was amazing as it was. But look, if you are not on board with this show yet, like I wasn't, you thought like watching an episode, but not for me. And you're looking for something to binge, this is worth a look.
Okay. And this is written and created by Jesse Armstrong, who did In the Loop and 4 Lions. So
4 Lions, one of the funniest movies ever made.
Yes, it's fantastic. I don't have anything else to talk about for Binge Browse Burn, but next week I will be giving my early thoughts on Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which comes out this week. I'm looking forward to it. Gonna make some crazy shit.
It's gonna be good. It's always good. Nintendo don't miss. They don't miss with that shit, So I won't be playing Tears of the Kingdom because I think I played 2 hours of Breath of the Wild.
It's because you like I said, you're a cold, heartless man.
It was fine, and in fairness, it was on a plane, so not exactly the best place to be playing video games.
I don't have anything else to say. Do you have?
I don't. I think it's a pretty good time to wrap it up. We're a little over our 90-minute mark, but we've done okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. If you watched along live, or if you catch us up later on podcast services around the globe, we were talking about Leon the Professional as our chain movie. Travis, you have chosen Talk Radio as our next stop. We talked about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the hot new movie that everyone's talking about, and Binge Browse Burn with Silo and Succession. Next week, we are going to be having Talk Radio, and we will come up with 2 other movies as well as some Binge Browse Burn for everyone. Until then, thank you very much. Good night.
Farewell.